Welcome. You are joining us on Exceptional Individuals Birthday Webinars. We always have a guest, or we give you some really great insights into neurodivergent life, basically, being a neurodivergent employee, helping you to navigate in the workplace. Today is going to be a spectacular day because so many of you signed up for neurodiversity at work and tackling discrimination and building inclusion. My name's Ruth-Ellen and I'm joined by Melvyna. I'm not even going to attempt the surname because I have dyspraxia and my pronunciation is interesting, to say the least. Actually, no, I'm going to try to pronounce it. Mumunie. I'll see Melvyna's face. What I'm going to do is introduce Melvyna, and then we're going to start the session because you're here to talk about discrimination. Melvyna specializes in discrimination and whistleblowing in the workplace. She is regularly instructed by clients across all sectors to advise on grievances, disciplinaries, work-related stress, and strategic exits and transitions. Drawing on her background in charity law, she advises her third sector clients with ease and expertise and has represented clients in high-profile cases before the Employment Appeal Tribunal and the Court of Appeal, bringing her deep legal knowledge and experience to the forefront whenever it's needed to meet clients' needs. Regular speaker on employment law issues, appeared as a keynote speaker at the Women in HR's first annual conference and joined Professor Andrews in conversation with her employment peers. Her specialisms include whistleblowing, discrimination, work-related stress, the charity sector, financial services, and partnerships, to say the very least. I could speak to Melvyna all day, just trying to have a little chat. It's going to be a rich conversation. So please welcome Melvyna to the stage. Your questions will be answered. Welcome, Melvyna.
Thank you so much, Ruth-Ellen. You did a really good job at my surname. I'm also dyspraxic. It's Mumunie, but I also don't know. So I think anyone can choose how they like us. I'm going to respond to any which way. So appreciate the effort in that as well. Thank you all for joining. I've got a lot of information. I've got a bunch of slides. I'm hoping to break some concepts down and to give you some background knowledge around things that you may already know and things you may not know and how they come together, looking at neurodiversity and types of neurodiversity, what the law says in terms of protections and discrimination in the workplace, but also then with that foundational understanding to think about more widely, what is it that employers can do and what is it that employees may want to ask for in the workplace or seek out to be able to work harmoniously, right? Because we all want to go to work and we all want to be able to turn up to work as our best selves, do the best job we can and enjoy ourselves as well. I think if we're privileged enough to do work that we enjoy or like the idea of, then we need to do that as safely as possible as well. This talk, I'm going to cover neurodiversity, different types of neurodiversity. By no means is it an exhaustive sort of explanation of different types of neurodiversity. I'm going to look at the Equality Act, and I'm not going to bore you too much with the law, but I have to talk about the law because I think this sort of information will give you the tools that you need to have perhaps some conversations in the workplace if necessary, or things to look out for. A bit of background on me, I predominantly advise employees. So I do a little bit of employer advice, but predominantly I advise individuals in the workplace. I do see quite a bit of disability discrimination in my work. A lot of the time it's not intended, but I think that's why neurodiversity as an area is really important to understand and for us to be a bit more comfortable with discussing needs in the workplace. We'll look at disability discrimination and then we'll move on to reasonable adjustments in the workplace, which I'll explain in a bit. Then we'll take some of that information and look at where employers may be missing it in the work life cycle, from recruitment to during employment. And then we'll go through a list of tools that employers and employees may implement in the workplace. At the end, of course, as Ruth-Ellen said, I'll be inviting questions, but there is a little bit of interaction here as well. On to my next slide. You're probably thinking, why am I asking what is a disability under the Equality Act? Because that's what it says on that slide and what it has to do with neurodiversity. We use a lot of different language to describe a lot of different things. I'm going to be looking at the definition of a disability as protected under the law. It's not to say that we should walk around or go around telling everyone if you're neurodiverse, you have a disability, so to say. But it's important that we have this definition and it's important to understand it because with that, that's where we could talk about the protections afforded to individuals in the workplace. An employee has the right not to be discriminated against in the workplace if they have what we call a protected characteristic. A protected characteristic can be someone's race, their sex, their religion or beliefs. A protected characteristic could also be a disability, and you have the right not to be discriminated against on the grounds of protected characteristic. What is a disability under the law? A disability is any kind of physical or mental impairment which has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on a person's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. Neurodivergent individuals may meet the definition of a disability under the Equality Act, right? If they have, as I say, a mental or physical impairment, which has a long-term substantial adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. A normal day-to-day activity may be something like doing a food shop. For example, got a bunch of things that I need to buy in the shop and I need to remember them. That's a day-to-day activity. A lot of us will write shopping lists. Going for a walk, watching television, socializing, riding a bike, reading a book. Long-term, the term long-term, needs to be for at least a year in most scenarios. I won't get into the nuances of how we measure long-term, but it's usually something that will last for at least a year. The impairment needs to be physical or mental. You may be beginning to see how actually if you are neurodiverse, say, for example, if you have dyslexia, you may have a mental impairment, which means that you might have a challenge with reading, right? That can really have a substantial adverse effect on your ability to do day-to-day things. If your dyslexia has that impact on you, you may meet the definition of having a disability under the Equality Act. Okay. That's where we start with these things. Not everyone with a neurodivergent condition will meet the definition, but it arises where there's a substantial adverse effect on your ability to do things on a day-to-day. A lot of people actually don't necessarily sit with that and think, what's a day-to-day activity? We set the bar really high, whereas actually sometimes we can be a bit gentle on ourselves and it doesn't need to be as high as we think. I've got a table here that looks at 5 different types of neurodiversity. And so some of our listeners will know all of these areas, all of these types of neurodiversity at the back of their hand, but I think it's important to just break down some examples. Starting with autism. Autism is a spectrum condition which affects how people interact and communicate with the world. I want to say in the first instance, I'd like to thank exceptional individuals because it's quite difficult to find really good definitions of these types of neurodiversity. I'm not going to lie, I have copied and pasted some of these definitions from the Exceptional Individuals website. Someone who is autistic or has autism spectrum condition, let's look at the characteristics, might take things quite literally, may feel overstimulated by certain sounds or smells, may feel anxious or uncomfortable in certain social situations. They might also enjoy routine, but they might also have a keen interest in expertise in particular topics. They may have a very good attention to detail. They may be excellent or very good at problem solving and creative thinking. They might have a really good memory. Someone who's dyslexic or has dyslexia, this primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling. Okay. Someone who has dyslexia might read or write more slowly. They might find it difficult to concentrate. They might face challenges with spelling. They might also have strong verbal communication skills. They may be very good at tasks involving 3D shapes and spaces. And then dyspraxia, that's a learning difference that affects how the mind processes actions, and it usually affects coordination and movement. Characteristics such as potentially having difficulty pronouncing some words, may find it challenging to follow directions or read maps, may struggle with spatial awareness, might have very strong verbal communication skills, may be good at thinking creatively, may have a great deal of empathy. Then we go on to dyscalculia, which is characterized by difficulty understanding number concepts, performing calculations and computations. A person with dyscalculia might have difficulty grasping the meaning of quantities or concepts. For example, biggest versus smallest, which is bigger, which is smaller, counting money, estimating time, judging speed or distance. On the other hand, they might have strong verbal communication skills, maybe creative and strategic thinkers. Then we get on to ADHD or ADD, which is characterized by inattentiveness in some instances, hyperactivity in some instances, and impulsiveness in some instances. This individual might have difficulty focusing on topics that may not be of interest to them. They may be impulsive. They may have very strong verbal communication. Again, thinking creatively out of the box, may hyperfocus. This is an explanation of how this might affect some people. I don't think everyone will tick all of the boxes if they have a diagnosis, but it's interesting and helpful to see how these conditions may be characterized for different individuals. With this, I've talked about on one hand, one individual may have these characterizations, on the other, they may have alternative characterizations that some might seem to be an advantage and some that might seem to be a disadvantage. Being in the space in the workplace where you may be surrounded by many people who, the term neurotypical, non-divergent, i.e. those who are not neurodiverse, are in the majority, a lot of people may go through a process of masking in the workplace. That's masking your condition. You may not even recognize that you're doing it. I mean, hiding parts of the condition or the characterization of your condition to fit in better, perhaps sometimes to get the job done. And you're not always aware of this. The impact of masking can lead to things like being exhausted, feeling isolated, levels of anxiety, that you can't be yourself. Sometimes you might not even recognize that you're not being yourself. Someone might need to mask if they feel that they need to be comfortable at work in that way. The question of what can employers do to maybe take proactive steps to avoid individuals feeling that they have to mask. And there's a lot of work that can be done, I think, societally as well as in the workplace. But employees can make a start by taking steps to make their organization more neuro-inclusive, thinking about how they talk about neurodiversity and language that's thrown around, and understanding the impact that actually some throwaway comments might have on an individual and how they may be perceived or accepted in the workplace. There's a lot about changing our mindsets, perhaps, but also being alive to the fact that there are individuals in the workplace that may be doing a great deal more work than some of your other colleagues. I also want to talk on quite a high level comorbid conditions. Comorbid conditions are medical conditions that occur in addition to a primary diagnosis. In the context of neurodiversity, this could be an individual with a specific condition that may be more likely to have another condition. For example, an individual who's neurodiverse may have insomnia, may suffer with depression, may suffer with anxiety. There's a lot of research that shows greater rates of depression and anxiety, some other conditions co-occurring alongside autism, dyspraxia, and ADHD. When we talk about disabilities, we can talk about neurodiversity for some as a disability, but it also may be the root or connected to other disabilities, and worthwhile keeping that sort of thing in mind as well when looking after ourselves and considering where we're at in the workplace. If, for example, we're accepting that an individual is neurodiverse and that meets the definition of a disability, what protections are they afforded in the workplace? I'm going to explain the 4 types of discrimination that are protected in the law, protections afforded to employees, and a little later on as well, we'll get to it. An employee in the workplace is protected from being discriminated against because of their disability, i.e., an individual is protected from being treated less favorably than other individuals because they have a disability. For example, an individual where an employer says, because of your autism, you need to work in this area. This is your autism. And therefore, I can't give you this extra mark in your performance criteria because you're missing out on something. And it's strongly because you are autistic. That would be direct discrimination. I am doing something, I'm treating you differently, and I'm treating you in a way that's negative compared to others because of your autism. It's rare that you will see an employer directly discriminating. What you often will see is, to my right, the Section 15, which kind of overlaps with what I've just said. Section 15 discrimination is discrimination arising from a disability. This is where an employer treats an employee less favorably, unfavorably, because of something arising from their disability. I think an example that may be helpful is an employer putting an employee on a performance management plan because the employer considers that the person, the individual, has really bad timekeeping in their view. Yeah. For example, maybe they're late to work, or maybe they're not great at delivering projects or work on time. And actually that sort of timekeeping concern is connected to their neurodiversity. Or they might be forgetful. They might forget documents or misattach documents to emails. By way of putting someone on a performance management plan, if we were to look at a performance management plan as not punishment, but separating that person out and saying, I've got concerns about your performance and your longevity here, one might say, actually, the reason why you have concerns is connected to something that's connected with what is a disability. An employer is not permitted to discriminate against someone on those grounds. But there is an exception to that rule. That exception is that the employer has to show that they have a legitimate interest. I won't get too legal with it, but that's the term. Objective justification. It's justified. They need their employees to be on time for the work day, to work well, to work in a grid, to work in a team. There's a question about, then actually, should the employer be putting in through flexibility? Is it possible to, or are they taking a really hardline approach unnecessarily? That's the sort of touch on the Section 15. You then have indirect discrimination, bottom right-hand corner there, a lot of words there. But the best way to describe this is a practice or a policy, right, that would put a group of people or an individual who has a disability or people that have that disability at a disadvantage compared to others. For example, having a policy that all instructions must be given verbally, orally to individuals, right? Some people may struggle. Someone who's neurodiverse might struggle with taking oral instructions and may need them written up. That policy will put that individual who needs written up instructions or written instructions at a disadvantage to other people, right? Like the Section 15, an employer may have a defense, because that would be discrimination if you're treating them differently. They could say, actually, we have a legitimate interest. We must have all of our instructions given orally for the safety of all workers, right? That might be their argument. I'm not going to go into too many examples, otherwise we'll be here until tomorrow. Again, the employer has to look at, actually, what can you do to make sure that you are making sure that this is inclusive and you're making sure that someone can do their work safely whilst also showing a bit of flexibility, okay? Then we have harassment. Harassment doesn't have to be carried out by a boss. It can be anyone in the workplace to an extent, and I'll explain why on the next slide. That conduct, that could be a comment, it could be putting something in writing, it could be physical movement, that where an individual in the workplace has subjected another individual to unwanted conduct which is related to a disability. That conduct has the purpose or effect of violating that individual's dignity or creating an environment that is intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive. There's a lot of words there. But harassment is basically someone saying something offensive and harmful in connection with your protected characteristic. If someone making a summary comment or assumption that's actually quite mean, horrible, derogatory about someone who is neurodiverse, that can amount to harassment. One thing that a lot of people don't know about harassment under the Equality Act is that the comment doesn't need to be directed at the individual, and it doesn't have to affect the person who is neurodiverse. For example, I had a colleague who wasn't neurodiverse, and they were having a conversation with another colleague who wasn't neurodiverse. And that colleague made a comment that was offensive, hostile, degrading about a neurodiverse person. That individual who isn't neurodiverse can still consider that harassment. There's quite a lot there. Those are some of the key sort of protections. Employees basically have the right not to be discriminated against in the workplace in connection with a disability. And that's not being treated less favorably because you have a disability, not being subjected to unfavorable treatment because of something that's connected with your disability, not having to be subjected to a policy that puts you at a disadvantage because of your disability, and not facing harassing conduct. This next slide looks at different types of discrimination and how it comes together. I touched on harassment, right, where it's two individuals who actually don't have the protected characteristic, but you can still feel upset by that and offended by that. There's also something afforded to disability discrimination, which is associative discrimination. Someone being prevented or treated less favorably because of their association with someone who is disabled. For example, who may have caring responsibilities. For example, a parent may have caring responsibilities for their child and may require more flexible working, or that person has had to take days off in the year to provide care for their child. As a result of having to take time off, they may not have gotten that promotion or may not have gotten the pay rise. That could be argued as associative discrimination. When we talk about harassment, now the individual making the horrible comments is making the comments. The employer is not technically making the comments. But there's an argument that we have which is called vicarious liability, and that's where the employer becomes liable for comments that an employee makes in the workplace. For an employer not to be liable, they have to show that they have taken all reasonable steps to prevent that unlawful conduct. Unreasonable steps might be things like training sessions. Often when you go to a workplace, you'll have a stream of videos and trainings that you should watch, often DEI, don't be mean, health and safety training. An employer might say, we've taken reasonable steps by making sure our employees take this training. But that's not often going to be enough if you've got a culture of bullying and harassment in the workplace. What steps has the employer taken to prevent that kind of behavior? Has the employer said, we don't want people talking about X, Y, and Z in the workplace? Has the employer said, we are open, we protect people, we speak out? Therefore, are they less likely to have that sort of detachment? We've taken all reasonable steps to prevent discrimination in the workplace. Then the third aspect here, and this is foundational work again. I know I'm getting you all to work very hard on your lunch breaks, but there's also a point of an employer not being liable for disability discrimination if they have no idea that the individual that they are treating less favorably, potentially less poorly, has a disability. Okay? They may not have a duty to make reasonable adjustments if they don't know that you have a disability. It's not necessarily, and I'm looking at this from the legal perspective of when I'm bringing cases and fighting cases in the tribunals or negotiating with employers or putting arguments out there, that they do know. My client may not have told you that they have a disability, but you have what we say is constructive knowledge. There's obvious signs, whether that's potentially repeated absences from the workplace, comments about the way in which they think or the things that they might need, or someone might not say, I was diagnosed with dyslexia or I have dyspraxia. However, my mind works in this way, and these are the sorts of things I need in the workplace to keep up with X, Y, and Z. One might say then at that point, the employer has some kind of potential knowledge that someone may have a disability. Now we're going to go to reasonable adjustments, because once an employer knows or should know that an employee has a disability, an employer has a duty to make reasonable adjustments. That basically means that an employer has a duty to make sure that an employee is not substantially disadvantaged when doing their job because of their disability, right? That could be putting in place physical features, in the workplace to make sure that someone's not disadvantaged. A lot of people often think about physical disabilities, for example, wheelchair access, making sure that there's wheelchair access in the workplace for individuals to enter the workplace, or perhaps an auxiliary aid. It might be some computer software, or it might be a color sheet on your monitor. These are adjustments that make individuals access the workplace with a little less difficulty. Sometimes reasonable adjustments might be really expensive, and sometimes they might be really obvious, straightforward, tiny tweaks. But an employer has a duty to look into them and work out what they might be. Okay? It is not for the employee to say, I need reasonable adjustments. This is what I need. It is for almost a collaborative experience. The employer needs to look proactively. They may want to take an input from the employee if the employee knows what they need, but the pressure should only sit with the employee. Often I see the way in which an employer might try to implement reasonable adjustments or understand what kind of reasonable adjustments are put in place is through what we call an occupational health assessment. You might have an independent organization where you might be booked into an appointment and they might ask, how does your condition affect you? Have a conversation. All of that might remain private, but then they'll produce a report that you'll see. And they may include in that sort of report what kind of adjustments the employer might want to make or put in place. That's high level look at some reasonable adjustments. But actually, let's have a look at this in reality and what we actually see from the statistics in the workplace. You'll see on this slide, 32% of workers have reported that their employer did not offer them any support with reasonable adjustments in the workplace, despite knowing that their employees may have or do have a disability. That's quite stark. That's quite high. That leaves employers at the risk of potentially discriminating against employees and putting employees under extreme pressure and stress and difficulties. 15% of people living in the UK are neurodivergent. I don't know if that percentage is up to date, but that's what I have here. Information from 118 organisations in the UK showed that 29% of participating neurodivergent employees said that they had experienced discrimination in the workplace related to their neurodivergence. We're seeing a bit of an overlap there between the 29% participating who've experienced discrimination, and you can see that there's 32% their employer didn't offer any support. And you just wonder, are you less likely to suffer discrimination if there are reasonable adjustments in place? That's the purpose of having a duty to make reasonable adjustment, in a sense. Another statistic here is around 60% of autistic university students in the UK drop out before they graduate. The purpose of this talk is not to go into duties of a university or education providers, but they are also subject to the Equality Act. So actually a lot of what I'm talking about here public service providers like universities, like schools, will be subject to a lot of the same obligations or duties that I've touched on in this discussion. But that's not my area of expertise. Examples of reasonable adjustments, because I'm talking about them in the abstract at this point, but it's helpful to get our minds around actually what sort of adjustments can employers be making. Employers should bear in mind that, as I've said, all employees may not know what adjustments are available or may be most helpful to them. It's useful to discuss the challenges. If possible, undertake what I said was an occupational health assessment or some form of independent assessment. These are just various reasonable adjustments that an employer might put in place. For different people who have different needs, there's not one size fits all here. A lot of these aren't particularly expensive for an employer, may not be particularly time consuming as well. It may just take thinking outside of the box, which I know that a lot of our neurospicy friends here probably do regularly, almost every day and all the time. Now I'm going to move on to a slide which basically puts together a few adjustments that may fit into some of the examples of neurodiversity that I touched on much earlier. Here we go. Someone who has ADHD, example of a reasonable adjustment for them would be allowing them or encouraging them, that individual, to take breaks for a change of scenery and physical activity, take lunch breaks. You might want to set an alarm for your lunch, right? Because the characterization might be hyperfocus. Going into hyperfocus nonstop, you may feel really good doing that, but also you may end up burning yourself out, which tomorrow, the day after, you're exhausted and got to look after you in the workplace. Someone with ASC, you might want to limit significant noise and or fluorescent lights in the office. You might want to have a room or quiet cubs or areas where that person can go and work without the distractions, without overstimulation, without all of the sensory overload. Or you might want to give that individual the opportunity to work from home as and when it's needed. Dyscalculia, you might want to provide the individual with a process map for doing computation so that you don't have to remember the sequence of steps if that's something that individual might struggle with. Dyslexia, I think dyslexia has been something that's been talked about for a number of years. And so unsurprisingly, there are a lot of resources out there. You've got the British Dyslexia Association, which has a style and guide for documents, the formatting of documents, font size, color schemes, all of that may be helpful. Again, it's not something that's expensive or too time consuming. And then dyspraxia, providing information in different forms. I know that I'm not great at completing forms all the time, and I sometimes have to print them out, and providing printing can also just be helpful for a lot of people. As I've mentioned, adjustments to help with concentration generally. Whilst we've got these tables, I think it's helpful to talk about the types of adjustments that can apply outside of specific conditions, but in terms of actually the characterization. You struggle with concentration, you might want noise cancelling headphones. You might want fidget toys. You might need a standing desk so that you can sit down, stand up, regular breaks throughout the day, quiet place to work away from distractions. You might require adjustments to help you with written communication. So that might include software to support with reading or writing, for example, a screen reader or speech to text programs, or having someone that you can talk through written information with, or someone who will break down instructions into clear steps, or you might need time to prepare that. You might get longer to do written pieces of work or projects, using different colored backgrounds for documents and signs and extra time to read information, etc. To help with organization and time management, you might want someone that can give regular check-ins, or a visually highlighted planner, or extra reminders. I'll have a reminder in my diary, but then I'll have to have a 30-minute reminder, and maybe perhaps a 15-minute reminder. And oh my gosh, the number of times where I still miss the reminder. But getting into habits like that, or making that available, making sure there's software available for that. Extra time to plan work. Someone who might need adjustments for sensory overstimulation. It might include, as I mentioned before, quiet space. You might want to actually be a bit more flexible as an employer with dress codes and uniforms, potentially allowing softer materials or calmer collars. Mentioned before, noise cancelling headphones, computer screen filters to reduce brightness, warning of changes at work in advance, extra time to process those warnings as well. Just being mindful. Those who might have poor balance or coordination might require specialist equipment, a different kind of keyboard or mouse that's easier to use. They might need to have organizing spaces to avoid clutter at their desk, which can also be a distraction, or signs giving very clear directions around the workplace. I recall starting at my workplace, quite a large building, and it took me about 3 days before I stopped getting lost in the building trying to find my office. Signage can always help with that. These are just some examples. I know that's a lot. I know I've not really paid too much attention to the comments just yet, but do please keep the comments coming. I like that the comment around standing in a meeting without being deemed odd. Certainly, I think just like normalizing that some people might want to stand or might feel a bit restless or may want to pace, but they're also listening and that's okay. Often the masking means that we sit there and we're tense or uncomfortable in that moment. Keep these comments coming and I'll try and get through some of them when we get to the end. Next slide. I have some scenarios here. I'm going to tell you about Sasha. Sasha is autistic and she works in a bar. She can get overwhelmed when it's very loud and busy in the bar. One thing that she really enjoys about her job is that she's really passionate about doing stock control, loading the bar, preparing the bar for the evening, the day. A lot of staff actually find that part of their work quite boring and tedious, which actually means that Sasha ends up being quite popular amongst their colleagues. Does anyone want to throw in some examples of reasonable adjustments that Sasha might benefit from in the workplace? You don't have to, but you're welcome to. Yes, wearing earbuds for sure. Sasha feels overwhelmed when it's very loud and busy in the bar. Giving Sasha the right to wear earbuds to block out some of the excess sound would be a really great reasonable adjustment. Better working pattern also, because actually Sarah might want to work in the daytime where there might not be thumping music and it might be a little less busy. On weekdays, a safe space to go decompress if required. Excellent. I mean, that these are better than some of the ones that I came up with, which I'll now share. If Sasha is overstimulated, noise reducing earplugs, focusing on tasks like glass washing and restocking fridges. They might be a bar back rather than at the front of the bar. Giving Sasha shifts at a quieter bar. Really great options. The next scenario, again, I'm going to just talk you through it and then just throw some answers in. Chris is dyslexic. Chris is good at explaining things when talking to others, but finds putting their thoughts down in writing quite challenging. Chris moves from their separate office to the open plan work area of their team, and they find that their written tasks are easier to do because they can talk them through with the team. Good at explaining things, struggles to put thoughts down in writing. What kind of reasonable adjustments might be helpful? Helen, provide training and support in quieter times. Check in on them, have a signal if they're overwhelmed and need to take a break. Great. That's awesome, Helen. Any more for any more? What I've got in the corner here is collaborative working exercises. Someone does well talking through their thoughts and their written tasks, bringing them into the fold and really utilizing that can be really helpful. Becky, yes, utilizing AI, encourage them to apply for access to work, 100% apply for access to work. Work body, if that's possible, absolutely. Utilizing AI can be really great. You might have done a piece of written work and you might just want to go, you know what, upload it into some AI server and say, make this very clear, check for grammar, punctuation, typos, and reproduce it to me. And you might want to listen to it back as well, just to make sure that actually it's getting what you want it to get across, if that might be helpful. I've also included providing dictation and text-to-speech software because if someone's a very great communicator verbally, orally, then why do we not hone in on that? There's lots of software now. I think even Word has a voice-to-text service through it now. We've got things like Dragon, which has been around for many years. And then we've got giving longer deadlines, because if you can, do it. Next slide. Last scenario. Jazz is dyspraxic. They work best by talking things through. They find it overwhelming to have lots of meetings in one day. What kinds of reasonable adjustments might Jazz benefit from? Would speech software be classed as a reasonable adjustment? I thought this kind of support could be arranged by access to work. An employer should support anyone's application. Not all employees use access to work. Some employers will just fund these sorts of things. It depends on who you work for and what their systems are. But by encouraging and supporting access to work application and access to work, providing that speech to text software, that's implementing an auxiliary aid. It is still a reasonable adjustment. Bring anything into the play in the workplace that might support someone with a disability is a reasonable adjustment. Allow bullet points format if it works. Great idea. Reduce meetings per day to 3 to 4. I think that's also great. Take regular breaks. Absolutely. Allow longer breaks. Absolutely. Examples I've said, Jazz has blocked out time each week where people cannot book meetings so that she can focus on tasks that they find more difficult. Have one day with no meetings, exactly. Someone she can talk to, bounce ideas off of. Yeah, all great. All really great. Thank you so much for giving some examples there. I deliver briefings. I always say right at the start, then I'll follow up in writing anything I talk about so folk can relax and be present and not worry about remembering or writing all the time. That's great. Okay, next slide. Now I want to talk you through the actual kind of like a very short, snappy look at the actual life cycle of being in work, right? Because actually we want to look at what is it that employers can be doing from the very outset. Because actually a lot of people that are trying to even get a job are coming from a place of services that are offered to public, students or job seekers, where there aren't resources there or there isn't an understanding or a knowledge. It starts from before you get into the workplace. Sometimes those barriers can be in place. What can we do in the recruitment process? I think this comes from the fact that neurotypical people tend to assume that everyone else in the world is like them, not intentionally or consciously, and might therefore overlook people who are not. The result is that actually sometimes neurodivergent people can become othered, leading them to experience a wide range of inequalities, right? Being discriminated against, not intentionally, but being treated differently or less favorably. We see this in job seeking services, which are also tight on resources. There are constraints there. One thing we see in the recruitment process is a tendency for employers to be looking for people who will fit into the workplace culture. They might emphasize in doing that some soft skills, even when those kind of soft skills, I say, are not really needed to do the job effectively. You might have a tendency for interviewers to choose people who they instantly warm to. We see that in all forms of when it comes to protected characteristics as well, whether that's commonality between around background, religion, sex, race. You can see that sometimes that does happen, or a failure to appreciate the types of skills and aptitudes in which a neurodivergent person might excel at. Or one thing that we still see to this day in all kind of professional roles and outside of that is the increasing use of psychometric testing and AI systems to shortlist people for jobs. There's a big topic in the law, particularly in employment law, around AI recruitment practices, performance managing, and how actually it can potentially have unintentional, perhaps discriminatory effects. Then you've also got employers that may have an undue focus on the formal interview as a means of employee selection. Someone who might maybe feel a bit uncomfortable with eye contact may not come across as well as the person who really looks someone in the eye, talks to them, and someone finds that confirming. But actually the person that might be uncomfortable with the eye contact may be much greater at the job, but you're not looking at that. They might come across as odd or they're not engaging with you, but that's just how you read that individual from your own experience in life. What can employers be considering in light of this? Let's start from the very outset. Job advertisements should be simple and short, right? They should explain clearly what skills are essential for the role and which ones are only desirable, because actually it's often people will look at a job description and go, this is all listed. I can do 4 out of the 5. Certain people will say, I'm not going to apply for the job because I can't do all 5. Breaking that down can be really helpful. One way to also capture the eye and show inclusivity, even with the intention of being inclusive as well, is giving examples of reasonable adjustments an employer might make or does make in the workplace. Saying we are inclusive, we're holding interviews or assessments in quiet spaces away from distraction. And really questioning whether those assessments are 1, necessary, 2, inclusive, and 3, appropriate for the role, right? Just because you've done it for many years, it doesn't mean that it still works. Or are you keeping people out of the workplace as a result? We give people at the interview the questions in advance and also some protected space for 10 minutes before the interview to relax and finalize prep. Shona, that's great. I think that's a really great thing. Petra, my employer, now shares the interview questions. Yep, again, we've got interview questions ahead. I'm glad to see that people are talking about this and getting questions. It doesn't necessarily need to be a stress and surprise. Employees may not also be doing themselves any favors where they put potential employees or recruitees under such pressure. Yes, that person may, despite the odds, performed really well, but sometimes that might leave a really bad taste in that individual's mind as well. A lot to be said about the way in which you're advertising yourself potentially as an employer as a safe space compared to another employer that is taking steps, which is why you're seeing a lot more employers taking steps to be more inclusive in that sense, because actually the workforce is quite competitive. Let's go to the next slide. You've got on the job, you're at work, and then next comes the training and support. And what's going on whilst you're employed? A good policy isn't anything without training and understanding by managers. Yeah. This is training the employer and the employees and the managers, sharing experiences and challenges faced by neurodivergent employees. You need to be in the room. You need to understand what those challenges are. When I talked earlier about characterization and how it may affect different people. No one's the same. Their neurodiversity may affect them differently or at different lengths in different ways. Having people involved in that conversation is quite important. Another add-on is there is benefit in altering the physical layout of an office space. Employers can provide opportunities for training, make sure managers know how to use the organization's neurodiversity policy if you've got a policy in place. Yeah. Encourage collaboration between managers across the organization to share experiences and approaches, but also do that with employees and make sure that you are creating a psychologically safe space where you might even want to put in place a champion. You've got mental health first aid England, mental health first aid champion, but you may want someone who's done all the training in neurodiversity, but more than one if possible if you're a large employer. Regular one-to-one meetings where team members can discuss any support that they need, not letting those meetings fall to the wayside and being on top of them, even if work gets busy, and monitoring things the employer put in place to make sure they are having a positive effect on the workplace, on the workforce. It's a little kind of fell off there on that slide. It's about making your organization more neuro-inclusive. Okay. So these are some examples. These are the things that employers can be focusing on. I know that this is a mixed crowd in terms of who the audience is. So I've tried to give information on both sides. What can employers be doing? What can employees be looking out for as well? Focus on improving access to appropriate employment readiness and training schemes. Offer staff the opportunity to participate in neurodiversity training. I have been a beneficiary many years ago now. I think it may be 6 years ago of exceptional individuals training. I was very privileged and fortunate to be able to have access to that. But I know that Exceptional Individuals has many seminars. I've just seen on LinkedIn as well, post a workshop seminar as well, which is fantastic. Work with expert neurodiversity consultants who can facilitate training. There are resources online. There are things going on online that ultimately employers should be taking advantage of and getting involved in if they really do want to make the changes in an inclusive workplace. Managers should ensure neurodivergent employees are treated fairly if any issues arise due to their conduct, and consider whether the behaviour is due to their condition or medication. When we talked earlier about the arising from, there are lots of, I see it more, and Ruth-Ellen and I were talking a little earlier about how some people are being diagnosed much later on in life, and they might say, oh, I've always had issues with my time organisation or last minute, but I have such a great relationship with my team. I'm the senior manager now. You see all of these things coming together, and then one manager getting really upset at someone else's management, and you realise it's part of who they are. What sort of things can we be doing to make sure that we hone in on the strengths and provide support for the things that might be deemed weaknesses? A full understanding of an individual's circumstances to be in a better position to decide upon appropriate action to take. Let's avoid punishing and disciplining and try and invite conversations and adaptations in the workplace. I think that kind of brings me close to the end. Let me have a look-see. Yep, questions.
We've had some really great interaction in the chat. Lots of people have been able to share their own experiences. Some of the questions are pretty mixed in with other things as well. I've got one around disclosures. I know the answer to this, but from a solicitor's point of view, disclosing, do you have to disclose before you even get to that interview stage?
No, you don't. Some people choose not to. Some people do choose to disclose for various reasons. Some people may want to go into the workplace and not be bothered or have everything they do be looked at through the lens of their neurodiversity. But some people may want to be upfront about that because they do need reasonable adjustments. There is no legal obligation to disclose. But if you think that there might be some challenges, or you may be held to a standard or an expectation that isn't fair or right because you don't have those adjustments in place, you can't expect adjustments from your employer if they don't know. I know I talked on constructive knowledge, but if you need adjustments in the workplace, or if you think you may need adjustments in the workplace, it may be beneficial to disclose. But that's different strokes for different folks.
Absolutely. You're neurodivergent yourself. But if I was going to give 3 key tips to help a person advocate in the workplace, I know you've probably done this for years and did lots of studying, but 3 key tips that would help them advocate based on your own background, what would be helpful?
3 key tips. I think first of all, it probably has to start with making sure you are prioritizing your health as well. So make sure that you've got tools around you to look after your health before you start advocating. Then we move on to, if you're having conversations in the workplace, take notes, right? Because you're not always going to remember on what day you said something. You're not always going to remember exactly what was said. If you're going into a meeting and you're advocating for yourself, make sure you have a note of what's being said. If you can have a colleague come in to sit with you, be a companion. If you've got concerns that you're trying to raise, you've got the opportunity to bring a companion, do so. If you're a member of a union, you have the right, if you're going through either a disciplinary process or a grievance process, you should be asking for support with that as well, because these things can be emotionally exhausting. It's really brave speaking up in the workplace if you're having a difficult time. The third key tip would be being able to switch off from the workplace to the extent that you can. I know I started with looking after yourself, but really it is about being able to switch off and being around the right people. Those are really soft. Those are soft things. But really the most important thing is getting the notes down. Don't be recording in the workplace, particularly if you've got a policy that says no recording. Think about personal data, taking it clear, what we call contemporaneous note, taking it at the time. It's really important because our memories can change.
Absolutely. One question was around recruiting for only people who are autistic. Is that discrimination? Also, the fact that company also asked for, a particular company that I know comes to mind, asked for the actual paperwork to say that their autistic self-diagnosis wasn't valid for them. Is that discrimination?
Okay, so this is tricky because I won't get too technical into it. There is the right for an employer, often in America, it's called positive discrimination, which is not what it is here. It's called positive action. Okay. I think it's the Equality Act. Again, I'd say that as a point of reference, where an employer in the recruitment process can seek to employ individuals with certain protected characteristics, because one, they may see it being less prevalent in the workplace. It's positive action. You're trying to increase that number in the workplace. But there is an argument that can also be, if done incorrectly, it can be deemed discrimination because it's called positive discrimination, which is not lawful. Positive action is lawful. Positive discrimination is not lawful. A lot of employers shy away from it, but some have been more forthcoming. For example, there's a law firm that opened up a legal apprenticeship for young Black people into the law because they found that where they were based, your local area is a great deal more diverse than your office. So you wanted to increase diversity because it was underrepresented in the workplace. You can have positive action, but it's quite a complex area. There's a lot more to it. Requiring a diagnosis, I'm already getting signs of alarm bells in terms of privacy and medical information or private personal data. But at the same time, is that sort of a legitimate interest? Do you need that so that you're making sure that you are getting people into the workplace that meet the criteria that you're trying to bring positive action into? Quite complex.
It doesn't sound so straightforward. It brings us to another question that's been highlighted. One around, it's not necessarily organizational wide, it's maybe a manager. How do you navigate with that? For example, how would you help support an individual that has a problem with their manager without making things quote unquote worse?
That's really my day-to-day job. When I have people facing discrimination in the workplace, it's usually someone that's more senior to them or a co-worker. It's difficult because, of course, you want to be able to just get on and do your job and you want to have a positive working relationship with your manager, but the person that's responsible for marking your achievements, your performance ratings, might also be treating you really poorly. You need to, if you want to do it the proper way, which is going through the formal channels, take your notes as the comments. You have a look at your workplace policies. There will always be a grievance policy. If there isn't a grievance policy, you go to ACAS and they'll give you an example of the policy and procedure that they should be following. Your manager is the source of the problem. Your policy will probably tell you who you should go to if it is a grievance against your manager or a concern about your manager. In the first instance, you're often encouraged to have an informal conversation. You could approach your manager and have that informal conversation. Remember what I said. Take a note of what you say. Sorry, I'm going off now, but you might even, before you have that conversation, make a speaking note, because sometimes speaking to someone more senior about something that's really affecting you and very serious, you might lose track of what you want to get down. Make your speaking note. Then you know what you've said. You make a note of what they say in response. If that doesn't fix the issue or support it, or you move forward in a way that's conducive, then look at that policy. It's probably going to tell you to raise a grievance or go to that person's manager and maybe have another conversation with them. They might say, can you put this in writing? If you feel comfortable with that, then you take that next step. That's how it goes. You never know if that's going to move things in a positive direction or it might make things worse. That's a real hard, I don't know the workplace, you know the players, so to say. But at least when you've had that conversation, you've got a note of what was said and you can start from there. But I've seen that sometimes it's come to more management type, well, everyone's a bit autistic. I mean, that reading the tone of that probably amounts to some form of harassment if you're dismissing of someone else's personal experience. That's conduct, a comment that creates a hostile environment. Someone who's looking forward and says, I'm autistic, and well, everyone's a little bit, and rolls their eyes. It's rather dismissive of someone else's experiences. That might amount to harassment under the Equality Act.
Is that grievances can be exhausting and stressful. Talked about well-being and how that's an important part of this process. By the time people go through the grievances process, at the end, they're very exhausted. They probably have to take time off from work. Are there any things that they can be doing that might reduce that?
I mentioned previously having a companion, right? If you've got someone that you trust in the workplace, who can come to the meetings with you, who might be able to give you some of that support, who knows what's going on, then that can be really helpful. It's hard, right? Because I think in my work, let's think about it like this. There are 7 days in the week. 5 out of 7 days you were spent in the workplace. You're spending most of your time in your life at work. When something's not going well at work, it is very hard to switch off from that. I don't think there's a pill that will cure that sort of stress that it can carry on into you. But having boundaries, switching off from work, maybe on your weekends and when you're not at work, not talking to colleagues because they're going to draw you back into the conversations. Allocating time to your day where you will think about perhaps the grievance. These are all things I can suggest, but everyone's going to be different. But it is a challenge, and it's a very brave thing to raise a grievance and to go through with it and to follow it through and stand your ground. With that, it's all the odds are not in support of protecting you in terms of your energy levels because you've already taken a really big step, and there's often processes, and sometimes a grievance might take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get a response on. So that's hanging over you, and you're concerned that people might be talking about you. I think one thing you want to maintain and make sure with your employer is all that is said in that meeting is confidential to the extent that it needs to be, because obviously the person who your grievance is against will need to understand to what it is that you're saying. But making sure that all employees are brought in for interview, keep the content of that discussion confidential and do not talk amongst themselves. These things will limit that tension, hopefully, in the workplace. And again, keeping a record if anything arises because you've raised that grievance. I was told by my line manager that being neurodiverse is not an excuse. No one's saying that being neurodiverse is an excuse, right? It's saying I might need some support for things or I might do things differently. I think that, again, shows in the view that they take in putting in place reasonable adjustments or trying to understand them. There's a lot of information on ACAS. I think the Equality and Human Rights Commission, EHRC, also has some good guidance as well on supporting employees in the workplace. ACAS and EHRC, Equality and Human Rights Commission, are both good places for resources. Managers also do need support. So that's where I landed with Kinga. That's where I landed at the end, which is actually the training as well and upskilling and empowering managers, because a lot of managers want to do the right thing and the best thing. But I think those that are often going to be the tiredest and most exhausted in the workplace are going to be those that are probably facing the difficult managers that aren't looking for the support. It's real hard.
Absolutely. So many great gems from today. If you want to learn more, Melvyna, why don't you tell us how they can contact you?
Yes, my details are here. But if you Google me, I'll be on the Cole Khan website. So I'm a solicitor, Senior Associate. Cole Khan, we specialise in equality in the workplace and regulatory work as well. Small little boutique firm. Doing very big things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can everyone in the chat please thank Mel for taking the time today, sharing such great wisdom and insights and personal experience as well. We really appreciate you being here and sharing this with us as well. I want to say thank you for the session. It's really appreciated. Thanks, Melvyna. And thanks. I think what's great about this is the very fact of you being able to hold space for everyone, Melvyna, and just share what basically is information that they just need. It's been so insightful. We're so grateful for you, exceptional individuals, for being able to share that as well. Everyone, thank you for sharing your own experiences as well in the chat. Whether you used your real name or not, regardless, we appreciate you because I think we're normalizing this. We're saying, actually, this is happening. but we also know that there's some tools available for us to move away from what's happening. We're not trying to say this is acceptable. We're trying to say, actually, let's talk about it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thanks all. Take care.